Welcome to the Earn First podcast. This is Arun Sulaman. I'm founding editor at Earn First. Very happy to be joined today by Margaret Key, someone who I've known in this industry for a long time. She's now the Asia Pacific CEO at Allison Worldwide and the executive director for Stagwell in this region. Margaret, of course, is someone who has built quite a remarkable career, I think, on the agency side in this region. Before Allison, she was CEO of Asia Pacific for MSL for almost 6 years. Also, Asia Pacific CEO at Zeno, and of course, Burson Marsteller, and spent many years at Edelman before that in Japan, in Korea, in Hong Kong. Margaret, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be here. Always a welcome opportunity to speak with you, Arun. Thank you.
Um, you have amassed significant experience, I feel, of different consultancies and different
Mhm.
types of consultancies, both independent and publicly held, which is something we will get to. It's very interesting, I think, at this point in time, given all the changes we're seeing on the holding group side. But let's start with why you moved to Allison and Stagwell from Publicis, because Publicis, obviously, as we are often reminded, is the holding group that um, seems to have figured it out compared
Yeah.
to all the others. It's the one that is most profitable. It seems to be the only one that is growing. And yet you left Publicis and joined a group and a firm that's, I think it's fair to say, considerably smaller.
Right.
Um, so talk us through your thinking.
Yeah. So I not you are not the first person. A few others have asked me the same thing, particularly coming from, as you said, a successful holding company like Publicis,
Mhm.
right? And I think, so I was there for 6 years. What I will say from the very beginning is my time at Publicis was probably more transformational in my career than any other agency for
Mm.
a number of reasons, right? One, as a successful holding company, which you can see they are leading the pack, and I think that they will continue to do so. Second is the ability to not only wear a PR hat, but to be able to sit in the rooms many a times pitching alikes with the other brands, which I was
Mm.
at another holding company structure where there was the notion that that should be the philosophy, but it really was more of a siloed PR entity within the holding company, but that wasn't the case at Publicis. So I think there's a couple of things also to add upon that. My time at MSO when I first started, they had just gone through a lot of consolidation, probably earlier than the other holding companies, right? And my job was to bring back the regional network. And we
Mm.
did that. I did that in collaboration and partnership with the other MSL leaders who are very strong, and I have complete respect for them. I enjoyed my time at Publicis, as I said, because it was integrated. But then when I looked at everything that is happening around the world, around when it comes to AI, technology, geopolitics, and more importantly, if you look at the four stalwarts of holding companies, they're all struggling. So when I thought about staying in an agency, in a holding company where I would be managing scale versus joining a agency brand in a holding company where I would be able to architect transformation in a
Mm.
time where transformation is happening all the time, I was like, this is a no-brainer. And so I go around, I'm probably answering the question longer than I need to, but I do think it needs, I have to provide some context and background around the decision because I just felt like I'd rather be on the build side than rather
Mhm.
than defending and managing scale. And that's
Mm.
also my decision.
I think the detail is really helpful, and it's a very interesting way to look at it because you could even make the case that holding groups were built for a different era,
Correct.
and Something like Stagwell, of course, as we know, it's not that old. Is it
Exactly.
10 years old? I don't know. It's
A little bit
not
over 10
much
years
more.
old. A little bit
Yeah,
over 10 years old. Yeah.
exactly. So you can argue, and I got the opportunity to interview Mark Penn recently, um, and it's quite a different viewpoint, I feel, compared to holding groups, where, as you have said, they are um, different flavors of struggle, perhaps, at each of the big traditional holding groups as they try to transform. I guess it's always harder to transform a legacy business than it is to build something new from the ground up.
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
I think the other element of it was, you know, the building opportunity, I think, makes sense in 2026 because the other thing that I saw happened so many times in the other holding companies is that PR, and I would say this to all my colleagues, including the holding company leaders, we're not the caboose of the train. So you can't come to us to add on PR as what they would define as activation, right? We need to really have a seat at the table where we're being strategic. And so in a Stagwell system where you have the tech spine as a foundation, you're not having to retrofit. The earned approach is already embedded. And you're working very closely with the other agency brands, which, by the way, I will say, if I didn't have my experience at Publicis where that was happening more so than not, right? It probably in the world of Stagwell slash Allison, I probably would have had a lot more challenges trying to figure out how does PR get integrated. But not only is it a more agile system, the other thing too, Arun, which I think we'll probably get to, is that the RFPs that are coming across the inbox are not just PR. Almost every one of the RFPs that I've seen since my start at Stagwell has an element of social or influence along with earns. There's an
Mm,
element of media buy, right? So clients are expecting, whether or not you're a big holding company or whether or not you are a challenger network like Stagwell, that you understand the need for the client to be able to manage different approaches across different platforms. And I think that is also the issue with the holding companies. The holding companies used to be about agency brands and networks, whereas now it really is about platforms and the communicators being able to understand those different platforms. And whether that you sit in New York or whether or not you sit in Singapore or whether or not you sit in UK, the ability to be able to translate issues and the client's needs against those platforms, I think are what the holding companies are trying to posture themselves around in terms of the
mm.
model.
But shouldn't this, if clients are looking for more integrated solutions, shouldn't that benefit holding groups as well? There was a period when it felt like public relations was being more integrated into overall holding group solutions. But if you look at recent trends and recent announcements from holding groups, you look at WPP, for example, with its recent restructuring. We're hearing that Burson might be up for sale because it doesn't fit with WPP's model, and Burson is effectively the key PR brand now because Ogilvy PR is run within Ogilvy. Um, you look at Omnicom and Omnicom PR, which is a big unit at whatever it is, 3 billion. Um, it's not it's not front and center when Omnicom CEO John Wren is talking to analysts or to the media. I can't actually remember a time when PR has felt less integral to holding group fortunes, certainly in terms of traditional holding groups. Do you think that's a fair observation?
I think that's your observation, but sitting in Stagwell, I would say the opposite. We are integrated within the network. It's one of the reasons
Yeah.
why I joined, right? I think, and this is my point of view, coming from the holding companies that I was at, the issue is that PR doesn't really do justice for ourselves within a holding company structure where it's about they have to be able to show earnings and growth, right? And that is going to the stock market and be able to say, we have a way of measuring growth. The holding companies are going to measure growth by the agency brands that give revenue growth, which is your media agencies. And your media agencies also translate to measurement, right?
Yeah.
You and I know the problem with PR is that we've never been able to have a holy grail of measurement. And we don't know how to defend our system, defend our industry within the holding company structure. So in a holding company structure where it's the constant need to show the shareholders that there's growth, your holding company leadership is going to obviously just lean into the media agencies or creative agencies where that's typically where revenue growth has happened, right?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
measurement is clear, and that's what clients like, right? We've always had the issue when it comes to PR not having measurable metrics around what it is that we do around reputation. However, my time at, and I've said this a few times to others, when I started at Publicis, when I had to speak to a lot of it's the country CEOs that really have wield and yield the power within Publicis. And when I would have to explain in the early time that I was there, like we are not, again, the caboose of the train. We're not just meeting with journalists. You have to understand. So I'll give you an analogy. And I said, you get on the elevator with your teams and you will go to the left side of the building and you will meet the CMO.
Mm.
MSL and what we do on PR side is we're going to the right side of the hall to meet the CEO. And I remember saying that to the leaders, and it just crystallized that that is essentially the value of the PR function or earn function within the holding company, right?
Mm.
And so I think to your point of it, PR has kind of lost its value within the holding company, and I would say I would disagree just because I see what's happening in Stagwell, right? But I also think that when the holding companies are having to show growth more so than ever now, right? They're going to default to the media agencies until we have, and I know that other agencies, I just saw another competitor coming out with ways to manage metrics and evaluation around PR. Everybody's going to have a different approach, but we don't have something is standardized. That's something
Yeah.
for us to really come together to figure out because it is missing in what we do in the evaluation point, not only for clients, but also within the holding companies.
I should clarify when I was talking about the value of PR within holding groups, I was really referring to the traditional holding groups rather than something like Stagwell. I think Stagwell is a little bit unique in a way because, first of all, um, comms accounts for, I think, more than 15% of overall revenue in Stagwell. And secondly, you have a CEO who has also formerly a
Yeah.
global CEO at Burson and understands the public relations business. I would imagine a lot better than the CEOs of, for example, the more let's call them the more traditional holding groups. Um, but I think your point is well made that when they're under financial pressure, as they are now, the
Yes.
holding groups, the traditional holding groups in particular, um, they will perhaps look to those segments where it's easier to demonstrate revenue growth and profitable revenue growth, perhaps. So that I think that point is well made. What do you make of all of the disruption at the traditional holding groups? We have seen um, WPP, for example, go from however many PR firms they once had, even when you were there, 10
Yes.
years ago,
Yes.
they had uh, many, let's say, and now they have effectively one and two if you include Ogilvy PR as well. Um, Meanwhile, at Omnicom, of course, we've seen Ketchum and Golan emerging. Porter Novelli is going to become part of Fleischman Hillard, along with messaging that this is not necessarily the end of changes to that portfolio. Uh, MSL, in a way, was ahead of the game. It did all this more than 10 years ago, I believe,
Right.
under Olivier Fleureau. But what do you make of it all? Are we just should we just get used to this idea that there will just be fewer and fewer PR brands within that holding group context?
I think with all that I've already shared, I think that is the inevitable, just because
Mhm.
it's not just happening in a room with the PR agencies, it's also happening with the creative agencies. If you talk to any of the holding company leaders of the creative brands, they're also going to say the same thing. It used to be 10, then it's 5, then it's 1, then it's 2, right? So
Mm.
it's not just PR. I think what's happening is like whatever, whether or not you are in PR or whether or not you're in media or creative or whether or not you're in the corporate world, you know, the saying that when you lose competition, the number of competitors only makes you better, right? That's the sad part. You've had these great flagship brands that are starting to get marginalized, and it's going to happen. I think in a holding company structure, the inevitability is they're going to just land on one or two. And like you said, I saw it in the early days. I think it was Burson and Cohen Wolf that was the first PR merger
Mm.
at that level, right? And
Yeah,
now it's just happening all the time. Did we ever foresee that it would be the merging of two holding companies, right? And so and
yeah,
so the reality is there are going to be fewer brands, but that doesn't mean that the value of what we do is minimized, right? If anything, I do think it's a huge opportunity for us to do a lot more for all the reasons that I've shared, right? I also think, though, Arun, it is going to be like an Allison or like a Stagwell. There's going to be the rise of these independent PR firms. I think just because we need more competitors and clients don't necessarily want big all the time, right?
no,
They want
yeah,
to have, they want to be able to feel like, and that's the problem too with these big holding companies, is that they're promised all these things. I had a very big client here in Singapore, working with a large global entity, saying that they work with the bigger agencies and there's an overpromise, but there is 100% under delivery, right?
yeah.
Whereas with smaller networks, you get to know there's a trust that is built, there's rapport, there's collaboration, there's intimacy between the clients and then the work. I think that will never go.
I think there's no question, like you said, it creates opportunity for other players, whether that's independent players, whether it's mid-sized players, whether it's domestic firms. I've heard differing views. Some people say it'll become a more of a barbell shaped market, concentrated at the bigger and smaller ends. I'm not sure because I feel like mid-sized firms tend to do quite well, and
Agree.
tend to perform well. Um, but a couple of other changes I wanted to ask you about. So, if you compare the holding group, or let's say the big networks today with 10 years ago in Asia, it's hard to say that they're in better shape in this region than they
Yes.
were a decade ago. It's also hard to say that they are as committed to this region as they were a decade ago. If anything, we've seen a retreat. We've seen networks consolidate their footprint in this region.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, many are in fewer markets than they were. It's hard to think of many that have significantly grown
Right.
compared to 10 years ago as well, which is mind blowing when you think about it. Um, and then the impact of mergers sometimes is that you don't always end up with the same strength as you previously had in specific markets, right? And I don't necessarily want to name names, but if you put
Right.
two agencies together and one of them is strong in China, that doesn't mean the merged agency will then be strong in China, right?
Exactly.
It doesn't naturally happen. Um, do you think the holding groups are as committed to Asia as they once were? And if not, why not?
So a few things. So you were asking earlier about the disruption of the holding
Hmm.
companies, and I was part of a merged entity. Marrying two agencies that are strong does not necessarily mean on the other side it's stronger.
Mm,
And I would say that's going to be the case for every holding company that thinks consolidation is going to result in strength is not going to be the case, right? I think the other part, so when you're talking about 10 years ago, my suspect is that you're talking about the PR agencies, right?
mm,
The PR agencies were much stronger. Yeah, and the reason for that is because they were independent, there was strong leadership. And Arun, you would know, a lot of these agencies had the industry's best of the best working,
mm,
whether that was in regional roles or in markets. And that has all changed because of what's happening in the holding companies. Bigger becomes bigger, but not necessarily better, right?
mm,
I think the other piece of it that we've touched upon is I honestly think my prediction 10 years from now, you cannot exist singularly as a PR agency.
mm. Okay. Right. Well, that will be a
Unless you are,
challenge.
well, unless you are, meaning my point is,
Hmm.
I still think PR, when it comes back to that analogy of going to the right side of the office and meeting the CEO, there is no other communications professional in the arsenal of a holding company that will understand better how to counsel any C suite on major, what I call high stakes engagement. It's not going to be the marketeer, it's not going to be the media buy, it's going to be us. So the value of what we do is not going to change. However, if you are only going to sell PR, unless it's at a high level, which is kind of the strategic advisory, you will have scale and you will have the ability to exist. But if
Mm.
you're going to be just doing traditional PR as it is,
Yeah.
going to have to know how to integrate functions. Because I
Yeah.
think that the holding companies are not moving away from brands, they are moving and evolving to platforms. And
Mm.
our ability to navigate across those different platforms, but holding true to us being the advisors and the evangelists for reputation, I think that's going to be the critical difference. And I think that's the reason why there's change 10 years ago from now, if we compare.
But does it concern you at all from an Asian context that this region isn't necessarily seen as a big driver of
Well,
PR
I think
agency growth?
no, I think that is just the economics. And I will say that coming from every holding company or whether or not I was at an independent agency. Because guess what? The primary market for any of these agencies is the US. If you are having to deal with all these tectonic shifts, whether it's AI, technology, geopolitics, you are going to harness as much as you can in the market that needs to be managed, which is the US. I don't think that means they are losing sight of Asia. I think it's just in a world that is changing so fast, how do you just keep stability? You keep your eyes on the primary market. And it is the agency's leaders that are either in a market like China or India, which, by the way, I think still are of critical importance to any agency. And I think agency leadership will see that it is important. The onus is going to be on the agency leadership this side to really make sure that whether or not it's the holding company or whether or not it was the independent owners, to understand as much as we need to do to salvage in the US or save what we need to do in the US, we need to also make sure that we're postured around protection and growth in this part of the world. I did that when I was at Publicis. So
It's a very
I don't think it's just the losing sight of Asia. I just think we're in a time of so much change, and you've got to take care of the biggest house in your network, which is for any holding company, it's going to be the U.S.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. Of course, again, it creates opportunity, right? Because then
Yes,
you start to see people leaving some of these networks and maybe setting up their own firms or joining, firms like Allison and some of the mid-sized players that aren't necessarily, like you also pointed out, they're not weighed down by this network model, which for the most part hasn't necessarily prioritized strategic advisory. It's been built maybe more around a more commoditized notion of public relations. Um, and that would seem to present a risk. Um,
yes. Yes.
given the way the world is moving.
But,
Um,
Arun, just imagine between the folks that we knew on the agency side, how many of them have left and started their own networks, started on their own, but then now collaborating across borders and across regions to work together, right? So it is a, while we see, and I know that the focus is a lot on the disruption and changes in the holding company, but on the same, if we look at it on what's happening with a lot of the folks that have left the agencies, this is going to be an interesting time. From now and like I said, the next decade, it is going to be a completely different landscape.
it's a really interesting trend. It's almost like an unbundling of
Yes,
talent
yes,
into different forms. So yeah, some people will join other firms, but many have launched their own practices. There's a lot of fractional kind
yes.
of work. There's a lot of collaboration and affiliation. How do you compete with that then if you're an Allison? Or do you
Well,
not? Do you capitalize on it?
I think we are capitalizing on it. And I think that the other part of it is going back to the question around what was Asia and what is Asia now. I was just presenting last week to Stagwell leadership, and I said, there was a time, and you will appreciate that, there was a time when I was running the region, and then I would say, we have the largest footprint. We have 2,000 employees, right? And I said,
Hmm.
in 2026, I don't say that because it does not matter,
Wow.
right? What
Hmm.
matters is I want to be where clients need us to be, and there are a few priority markets for that. I don't need to have 250 employees in a market. I could have 50 that are going to lean into Stagwell's tech spine, a lot of the tech tools, right? We train them, we educate them. They are tech enabled. They are going to be the best tech enabled communication professionals in the industry versus
Hmm.
being part of the biggest agency in a market or part of the biggest network in the region. I think that's
Hmm.
also very important for kind of contextualizing what makes a strong agency in Asia in 2026 and beyond.
Just a couple more things I wanted to ask you about on this topic. The bigger firms, as we've seen, have really struggled to grow over the last few years. If you take out the post-pandemic year, there really hasn't been meaningful growth from the big PR networks for several years. You look at Edelman; it went above 1 billion, now it's below 1 billion, and many of the others have more or less hovered at around the same level. Do you feel like size is now not an advantage?
I don't think it's
Can
an
PR firms become too big?
I don't think it's necessarily size. I think that what happened over the last few years, and you may or may agree or disagree, is you saw the exiting of strong senior talent,
Hmm.
which then had a direct impact on growth.
Okay.
We are, and I say this all the time, we do not sell cars, we do not sell phones, we sell the value of the talent that we have,
Hmm.
right? And there is a healthy balance between having senior counselors and junior folks coming in to learn. And there was so much of the retrenchments that were happening post COVID that continue because this whole focus on the economics and growth. Yes, we're a business, right? But I do think that what we saw with the retrenchment or kind of the retraction of these agency networks came down to you're losing really good talent. And to me, that is foundational to an agency.
Hmm. Okay. Um, you moved from Korea to Singapore.
Yes.
Uh, I wanted to ask you about that as well because Korea is an interesting market. It's not one where international firms have necessarily prospered. Um, of course, Singapore is de facto regional hub for the comms business in Asia. But what's your take on the Korean comms market at the moment?
Well, I would say this. You know, that's my home market. I have
Hmm.
lived
Yep.
and left Korea 4 times.
That's like me with Hong Kong.
There you go, right? And so I've been so fortunate to have been there, left there, and moved into other markets, right? I think I made the decision to move to Singapore, not just because I needed to be in Singapore because it's a regional hub, but
Mhm.
for personal reasons. My son's older now. I don't have to worry about like being in a market to take care of home per se, right? But I see a lot of things happening on the Stagwell side, which really like is probably better for me to be here. However, me not being in Korea does not mean that I'm not selling Korea in Singapore. I'm doing it a lot, right? With clients and with the agencies, because there has been so much that has happened with Korea as a lead market, not a satellite market, not an add-on market, right? Because of all that you see when it comes to cultural trends. A lot of the Asian multinationals in this part of the world sit in Korea for such a small market. I will also say, Arun, and I did this kind of my own homework, every one of the major global PR firms operating in Asia have a stronghold operation in Korea. Every single one of them.
Mm.
Meaning the strength of the network is not, again, footprint or, say, China. It is having a stronghold in the Korean market because you
Yeah,
have
it's a
the,
good point.
you look at every one of them, do it. Go by every single agency and look at their strongest team or operation. You will have it sitting in the hole.
And yet we don't often talk about Korea as a one of the as being as crucial as perhaps it is. What do you think is unique about the Korean market? What does it bring to the world from a comms perspective?
I sat last year at Cannes on in collaboration with the Publicis Korea team talking about K-pop. That room was standing only, and it was everybody. We had a panelist that included one of the entertainment companies. The CEO was on the stage, as well as the CMO for Pepsi, and we were talking about what why has K-pop become kind of this cultural groundswell of all things, audiences,
Mm.
platforms, trends, right? And I think to your question, it is become this influencer market. And if we talk about what we do, and even how PR is defined within some of the holding companies, it is
Mm.
influence when it comes to what we do, but also its direct correlation to kind of the new influencer, which is influencers like the K-pop idols, right? But I also think it is Korea. You look at what Japan used to be with a lot of the Asian multinationals sitting there, Nissan and Toyota. Korea, when it comes to Samsung or LG or Hyundai or POSCO or Kia, name all these companies, they are truly global, right?
Mm.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot happening in Korea that is more than just that market, which again, when I was starting in that market, it was always how do we add on Korea to what we're doing in the region? Now it's
Yeah.
like how do we leverage Korea to manage what we could do, not just in Asia, but globally.
Yeah. No, and we need more of that thinking in general, I feel. Um, and I love that idea. It's the correlation. A strong career is, career is good for your Asian business. One quick question, and then I want to ask you about International Women's Day. Do you think it is actually possible for a firm to genuinely be able to integrate, strategic advisory, corporate, public affairs with consumer, creator, social influencer? Because I'm not
Yes.
sure we've seen it happen.
I definitely see that happening. I mean, I hate to use it because I sound like I'm I'm doing PR for Stagwell, but essentially
Well,
what
you
you
are. I
described,
mean,
well, but essentially what you have described is what Stagwell
Mhm.
is. The
Right.
leader comes from a strategic comms public affairs background.
Hmm.
And all the brands that sit underneath that, outside of the communication and advocacy pillar, are all that you said, right? The value that as I started off the conversation when I was at a Publicis, the value of those 6 years was not wearing just the PR hat. It was the PR hat sitting right elbow to elbow with the other agency brands.
Mm.
The pressure on us is we still can embrace what it is that we do, like again, strategic comms or public affairs, but we ourselves as professionals need to be able to feel comfortable in a room with somebody from media and creative to
Mm.
understand how we can embed reputation and reputational initiatives, campaigns, whatever, in the scheme of a campaign when it comes to either a media or creative. I think that is what needs to be done. Very, very important. And
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's been the problem though. The
Mm.
problem, by the way, you and I have talked about it. The last big global RFP pitch that I was part of is the
Hmm.
organization siloing PR from the rest of marketing comms.
Yeah,
Doesn't
right.
mean you need
Although they
to,
called it earned, I believe. So.
yeah, correct. Yeah, correct. Exactly. Yeah. But we need to, as an industry, say we can do this better than anybody, but we also need to be able to be conversant and comfortable in the space of marketing comms.
Yeah, it's not enough to say it. You have to be the change.
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's IWD week, of course, and you were not the first female um, network CEO in Asia, but I think you were the first Asian female PR network CEO. Um, and now, thankfully, we've had several several Asian women who have ascended to that role. But how do you feel about the progress? It feels to me a little bit like there's been a reversion or even a regression. When I look at the top 10 agencies in the world now, it's more male than I can remember for a long time. Um, so, are you happy with where we are compared to say 10 years ago?
I'm happy where we are. I will say this. I always get a bit uncomfortable around anything related to International Women's Day because I feel like the focus is more on women than just in general. What I feel is also the men as partners to women's ascension or rise, because when you mentioned that time of me being, whether or not we could find another person that was in that role before, if I was the first Asian female CEO, then great. I'm proud of that. But I never had a female boss, Arun,
Mm,
during that
yeah.
time. Which means I was very fortunate to have worked with the men that I did because they never treated me like I was anything less than the men that they worked with. Never, right? I think for me, it was making sure that, especially in Asia, being able to go to work and balance being a mother and a wife while also being ambitious is very difficult compared to, say, working in London or New York. It still is very difficult, right? But outside of that, if I look at kind of the benchmark of the other leaders in Asia, I'm really buoyed by the fact that there are more women, definitely, than when I was starting, right? Which I said, I think shows great progress for our industry. However, I would say if we look at the global leadership, I don't think I would agree with you. I think outside of a few leaders, like Wendy Lund has just joined from GCI Health to become the global CEO of Allison. I think at the global leadership level, it's gone backwards. There are more men. And I think the reason for that, again, goes back to what's happening with the consolidation of holding companies.
Mm,
They're,
yeah.
they're leaning into the male leadership, right? So I think progress, yes, but as much progress as we would have hoped 10 years later, probably not.
What do you think needs to change from that perspective?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, if I'm only going to use it from the lens of Asia, like I said, I still think outside of factors in the agency, women are having to do a lot more at home than, say, men compared to other parts of the world. Can I change that? No, but I'm clearing that out as a reason for why there is probably not as much change. I think second is women like myself and the others that are running agency leadership, making sure not just we've taken the job, we're doing what we need to do, but we're also making sure that we're clearing the path for the next future generation of women leaders to feel comfortable doing this role. Because I think it's not traditionally, we're not normally business focused. We are much more about embracing stakeholders and looking at how do we create balance within within the agency. And I think it's the men have been much better at being stronger. I'm going to get myself in trouble for saying this, but much stronger and stronger proponents around business factors, right? And I think as the agency leaders, we will be able to show that, as an example of what needs to be done. The more that we know how to take care of people and clients, while also keeping the fundamentals of business intact, I think is showing an example for the next generation, right? So I speak to that in terms of the APAC lens. Outside of the global lens, I think it would still be applicable. We need to give more opportunities for the female leadership to stand up. And I don't think that's
Yeah.
been the case.
Yeah, it's a shame we're still having this conversation in 2026, but it's unavoidable.
Well, but I
Margaret,
appreciate the fact that you're raising this because you have been somebody that has been observing the agency network and the industry for such a long time. I think it is still important to call out because, yes, change and progress has been made and achieved, but we would both agree probably there's room for improvement.
indeed. And I think it's time to also take a look at the demographics of the industry in Asia because, even around pay, you wonder how much progress has been made
Correct.
as well. And I feel like we are not data rich in some of these areas. So I'll do what I can to address that too. Margaret, thank you so much
Thank
for
you,
your time. I
Arun.
think we are almost out of time. It's been a great conversation.
As
I really
always,
appreciate it. Yeah,
yeah,
as
thank you for
always.
the opportunity. Thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. I'll see you soon, I hope, and hopefully we can get you back on the podcast soon as well. So thanks to you.
Love
Thanks
that.
to our producers at Earshot Media as well.